Alright, what is poppin', people? We're back. And just as a quick aside, before we get into the video, I do want to comment that some of you might be aware, currently dealing with some stuff that's not all too pleasant, but I'm gonna still try to keep myself happy for y'all. I'm still trying to keep getting out content. All I can say is, for those that have reached out in concern, I appreciate it, but we move on. Anyhow, I was thinking about Pokemon Spotlight, and I think Generation 8, and even Pokemon generations as they've gone on, have given us some very funny moments in terms of like where bonds have been tiered. You can think about Moltres at one point being NU back in Generation 7, despite it finishing UU. Start out the Gen NU. All enough. You can think about Zygarde 10% falling all the way down to PU even this generation. You could think about things like Hoopa Unbound, I think's even fallen to UU before, after being banned in Ubers in Gen 6. I think one of the most impressive demonstrations of this effect, the power creep, though, has been Talonflame. Now, for those of you that were around back in Gen 6, you'll know that Talonflame was a very solid OU Pokemon. I don't play OU anymore, so I'm not sure how true that is nowadays. But Talonflame had, or still has, Gale Wings. And in Gen 6, what Gale Wings meant was that you got to always move first when you're using a flying move. Meaning Talonflame had both priority recovery and a really strong priority attack in, I'm gonna say, acrobatics, because there were no boots back then, so you could much more justifiably run that. This made bulk up sets, I believe they were like Acro Wisp, Bulk Up Roost if I'm remembering correctly. Probably some variation thrown in there, but this made those sets really good. Talonflame was not only really hard to revenge kill, but it was also just incredibly effective at cleaning teams. It was always hard to get that finishing hit off just because it was so naturally fast. It had the ability to recover, pretty much before anything. And once your team gets weakened, there's not a whole lot that wants to contend with, a boosted 110 BP stat move. That's hard to deal with. But Generation 7 hit, and Talonflame lost Gale Wings. It didn't lose Gale Wings, right? But Gale Wings got nerfed to where you only got the priority if you're at full health. And obviously that makes Talonflame a lot less effective, because if you look at its stats, I'm not going to take away the EV investment, but if you look at its base stats, they're not very good other than its speed, right? Its speed's incredible. But every other stat's pretty below average, maybe average at best if you're looking at the attack, but even that's, not good. And so as a result, Talonflame ended up dropping all the way down to RU, where eventually it got banned, because at the end of the day, you still had Supersonic Sky Strike because of Z crystals, and that did let you sort of still get something out of Gale Wings. And obviously, at the end of the day too, right, Talonflame's supernaturally fast, so just SD, Z movesets were still really good. And while this gen Talonflame has gained access to heavy-duty boots, it hasn't really been enough. It's got a lot less offensive potential, and as a result, at one point it was even down in PU. Now it's one of NU's staple utility Pokemon, but it's a pretty significant fall from grace for the once really dominant little Firebird. And so let's talk about where its spot is currently at NU. So, naturally, Talonflame is still one of the best forms of just general speed in the tier. 126 speed is 126 speed. That's just really good. If we look through what's actually tiered NU, there's very little that naturally outpaces that. It's Aerodactyl, it's Ninjask, and then there's nothing else. And so what you're left with contending with T-Flame in terms of speed is going to be essentially Choice Scarf users. Things like maybe Inteleon or Flygon, maybe the occasional Scarf Salazzle. And then you do have a few priority move users too, right? But a lot of them are either not strong enough to actually dent Salazzle, or not Salazzle, Talonflame, or they're resisted, right? Decidueye Shadow Sneak, not really strong enough to threaten you, unless it's, boosted. And you got things like Surf Edge First Impression, or Flygon First Impression, uses those. really all you're looking at from priority-wise is give you something like maybe a Toxic Rogue Sucker Punch, or maybe like a Sword Stance Surf Edge Quick Attack. You're otherwise pretty much always gonna be the fastest Pokemon on the field. There are very few situations in which you're not. And so what else makes Talonflame really good? One of the things is definitely Flame Body. With Gale Wings being nerfed, this ability, which is quite good, let's not forget that, is, given a lot less opportunity cost to being used. And what Flame Body does lets Talonflame do a lot of just annoying things. You can pivot into U-turns for Pokemon like, say, Flygon and Fish for burns. Or you can pivot into resisted hits from even Surf Edge. Like, you can switch into CC or First Impression, and you could burn Fish against that and make it a lot less problematic. You could try to pivot around resisted hits from the likes of even, if you really want to, Tyrantrum. Or maybe a more realistic mod, Tauros, or Ninjask even, and just try to cripple the opposition through burn spreading. And again, because of Talonflame's speed, even though it's kind of weak, it is still a decent revenge killer. You're given a lot of speed benchmarks you can go for. This one that I'm showing right here gives you speed for max speed Salazzle, so you can revenge kill things like that, things like Heliolisk if you maybe run Brave Bird instead, things like Starmie if it's low enough. It just gives you a lot of leverage with what you're allowed to creep. You can go, I even creep up to like Inteleon, because hey, Sniper Inteleon's sometimes a bit of a demon. And I would say this is probably the most common set. Salazzle's also one of the few Copper Raja-like answers. While Stone Edge is always a bit of a threat, you pivot into every other move really safely, and again, Flame Body. But when we're talking about what T-Flame could do with its set, right? There are what I'll say there are like two standard sets, and then I'll show deviations that we've seen T-Flame run more recently, even a little bit in the past. So, Brave Bird, Willow, Roost, U-Turn, I would say is probably the most common. Regardless of what you run, you always want a way to deal with the steel types, in specific though Copper Raja. That could be running Flare Blitz, you'd run Toxic alongside that, or it could be running Will-O-Wisp just so you can, burn them and make it so they are at least consistently taking damage, or or you're negating their lefties and you can like slowly but surely Brave Bird them down. But I think Brave Bird is probably what most are running right now offensively. Mostly just because it lets you better deal with Surf Edged. Because at the end of the day, Surf Edge can potentially muscle by you if it's predicting your switch-ins properly and not getting burned. And so I think a lot of the time you really do value Brave Bird. Plus, this hits Inteleon and Salazzle for neutral damage at least. And so that lets you actually function as a revenge killer to them. Otherwise, you're really needing a lot more chip damage off on them. Now, of course, like I mentioned here, you can do this as well. Willows is also good against Diancie, but that's usually healed away. This is similar in that Flare Blitz is a little bit better for Rotom Cut, which otherwise you may fail to revenge kill reliably. Flare Blitz is better into a Scavalier as well. And having Toxic lets you, cripple still Diancie if you need to, still Tyrantrum if you need to, but also bulky water types like your Vaporeons of the world, your Mantines. Now again, Vaporeon probably just gonna Heal Bell it away, but hey, if you can force it to burn Heal Bells, then you eventually will win the PP war. 16 is greater than 8. And this really is about it in terms of what you're looking at, like, standard. Talonflame generally is taking a utility route. That's not to say there aren't some deviations. And I think probably the most common one is saying, hey, I'm putting Defog on Talonflame. Now, in my personal experience, I'm still unsure whether I like dropping U-Turn more or the status-inducing move more, if I'm going to force Defog on a T-Flame. I don't like Talonflame as a defogger too much, I will admit right here though, because I find that if you drop U-Turn, you're just a sitting duck against a little bit too much. And then if you drop status, then like a lot more switches into you and doesn't care. You can always U-Turn on stuff. It's just not the same, man. And plus, your matchup against a lot of the common Stealth Rock setters, so you're looking at mostly Diancie, Bronzong, which runs Heat Proof fairly frequently. Those two in specific, it's just not that good. Again, T-Flame, it can be a fogger if you really need it. It's just generally not advised. Well, let's talk about some like recent set adaptations. So, remember that set we were talking about from OU earlier? Okay, well, I guess that lets me Will-O-Wisp. Well, it has actually been being shown off a little bit in NUPL. We've been seeing a lot more Talonflame run setup-oriented sets, whether it be with bulk up or sword stance. And the reason for that's just essentially Talonflame is a very fast Pokemon with a decent amount of defensive leverage due to just typing, and if you invest, good enough bulk. And that lets you have pretty insane late game potential. As we established earlier, there's not a whole lot in the way of revenge killers for this mon. And so, you could get Chip on Vaporeon or Diancie, you got a pretty good shot at going in late. But I think another set that is kind of cool, that doesn't really see usage, is, it's going to be like this hyper offensive oriented set, and I'm going to kind of bullcrap the flying move, because I haven't seen enough of this to know if Brave Bird or Dual Wing Beats may be better. I think even maybe Acrobatics if you want to. You know, let's put Acro there. Let's go full power. But SDT Flame with like dual screen support. I've seen a couple people talk about stealing Talonflame in general as is, but I do think there's probably some merit to a set like this on those much more offensive builds. And a big thing is you learn Diancie and can dispatch it really easily, but also just you have a lot more offensive pressure. And so, say Pokemon like Vaporeon, maybe like more defensive Mantines, even some soft checks like Tyrantrum, you just don't need as much chip or as much, prior setup to actually, reliably get by them. And I think that's a pretty cool positive for these sets. Again, not something we see too much of, but something I still think is worth considering. And that's really all there is to T-Flame. I think with the potential, the impending leaving of Flygon come July, I think Talonflame's got a lot of potential to continue just ascending up the ranks. It's already viewed in really high regard. But with another Pokemon out of contention for like just general fast pivoting and, utility tasks, maybe we see a little more T-Flame. They are functionally still pretty different, but I don't know. I think there's still merit to saying, oh, I lost my fast pivot? Well, here's at least another option for one, right? And I think that's about it for this video, guys. If you still haven't been, too sold on Talonflame just due to, still the whole, oh, but Gale Wings bad narrative, I would still recommend trying it out, because I think it's, again, utility-wise, insane. And, hey, you can still do setup sets just fine. I'm sure you can still justify Gale Wings even, but I think Flame Body just is too good for the leverage it gives you around certain Pokemon. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. And once again, welcome to all the new people, because there's been a large influx of new faces around here, so I'm glad to see everyone here. I hope we can enjoy our time together. So next time, I hope you guys are enjoying your life, and I'll see you then. Peace.